Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're gonna work with some Bulbophyllum orchids. We're going to repot them because they're outgrowing their pots, but we are generally going to address the orchids which have a creeping nature. Not creepy, but creeping, meaning they have rhizomes which grow horizontally across the surface of the pot. Usually they have shallow roots, and in no time they can just outgrow their pots. We're not going to work with this guy today. We are going to stick with the Bulbophyllums because they are notorious for this type of growth. And obviously you can encounter some difficulties if you grow your orchids potted. So the two Bulbophyllums I have here are the daisy chain, which produces a very long rhizome between two pseudobulbs, and it takes over a pot in no time. I have this orchid for a year and a half, and it's already time to repot. And the Bulbophyllum echinolabium, you can see we don't have a long rhizome, but this guy produces multiple pseudobulbs per year. It grows very fast. And again, it's threatening to grow outside of the pot. So I need to address these two orchids. They're epiphytic, so even if they put out roots outside of the pot in the air, it's perfectly fine pretty much. They will not mind it all that much as long as you keep them hydrated. Bulbophyllums love water, hate being dry most of the times. And for my growing style, it's not a good idea to have most of the roots outside of the pot because I simply cannot water them every single day, multiple times a day, or as much as to keep them hydrated. So in order to make my life easier, I need to keep them potted. And moreover, I have them in a self-watering system, which served me pretty great. Considering my environment, it is a very suited setup for them. Not sure if I will continue self-watering because I will use pretty large pots, but overall I do want a medium which retains quite a lot of water. Let's discuss a little bit the setup issue. Given the features of this orchid, it's a rambling orchid, it likes water, it will continuously expand on a horizontal level, the roots tend to stay rather shallow. People developed all sorts of setups for them. You saw mine, it's a rather shallow pot that is falling apart with a wick and a pot that serves as a reservoir, but people also grow these orchids mounted on a piece of wood to accommodate their rambling nature. Those setups require very frequent watering, so it's not everybody's cup of tea. Some people actually use normal pots, but you can see the issue here. Yes, the pot might be wide enough, but it's a little bit too deep. It's not an issue, to be fully honest with you, and I will address in one video the pot size issue because it's a thing that kind of came up in the comment section lately, and I think an explanation would be in check. So the depth, it's not an issue. If you know what you're doing, you can actually play with the layers of the mixture. You can put a very non-water retentive, very airy mix at the bottom, and then go with your more water retentive medium at the top. As I was saying, roots do tend to stay rather shallow. They will go here as well, but if you think they will have issues due to the amount of water in the pot, then obviously you can play with the layers and pretty much cut the pot in two, theoretically speaking. So that's a setup that some people do, and it's a great setup, works very well. Some people don't even layer the substrate differently because it's just so hot and so dry that it really doesn't matter the size of the pot, it will dry anyway. Some people go for very shallow pots and even very shallow trays. I did see quite a few people just put a layer of sphagnum moss or a different type of moss and just pot the orchid on top of this tray. You would want to use a bigger tray than what I'm showing you, but they have the advantage that you can keep them like this, rather vertically, or you can suspend them. You have all sorts of flexibility when it comes to this. The downside is it's not going to retain a lot of water. It's not very deep. So this setup typically works better in those environments which are not super hot or super dry. Maybe they're cooler and more humid. Works great, and in the end all of these setups are really meant to create the same result. But that's the problem with different environments. You cannot create a particular result in the same way because you don't work with the same variables. Alright, so with that look on the various setups, let me show you what setup I will be using. And here is my pot, which is actually not a pot, it is a food container. Whenever I am in need of a pot which is not a standard size or I just need something special, I usually find it at the supermarket. And food containers, especially the transparent ones, I find are very suitable. Little side note here, some pots which are high quality are also UV treated. So theoretically, if they sit in the sun, they will not crumble. They will not be affected by UV. Food containers might be. So with an improvised pot, which you don't know if it has been treated against UV, better to play it safe and keep it in shade. Don't go putting it outside in the sun because it might actually crumble, and it could crumble really fast, like within the year. So that's the only downside to food containers. If you can, do protect them against the sun. Some of them will just not last. So what I chose here are some containers which you can see are rather shallow and wide. I will not go self-watering right now because I went to IKEA the other day as always and I found myself a decorative pot which could fit. Yeah, it's a little big, it's kind of cute, but you know what? I can always recustomize this pot. I'll tell you how, but for now I am growing my bulbophyllums on my shelf under my LED lights, and this is the most appropriate setup because I can create a little pool of water at the bottom, which will be absorbed by the medium and delivered for the next days. We'll get to that. If I so desire to make it self-watering, all I would need to do is insert a wick. Yeah, you can do that after you pot the orchid, because again, I will make sure that the first layer at the bottom is actually sphagnum moss, and also find a container which will make a perfect seal with the rim of this container. I could also do something else. I could get a hook and maintain it hanging. So it's very versatile. I wanted to buy one with a lip just so I have this versatility, just so I can tell you about the various ways in which you can keep orchids. You can even find yourself a wooden basket and pot the orchid in the wooden basket. It's gonna be very, very airy. Once again, it's not gonna be as wet as this. So do think about your environment and do adapt it. There is not one way to achieve something. An environment plays a major, major role. Alright, so this will be my pot. That will be the decorative container, for now at least. And with that said, I think it's time to get to work. A little side note, if you were wondering what this was doing here, this is a marker. I was actually experimenting with silicone fertilizer on this orchid, and I don't think it liked it. None of the orchids that I experimented silicone on did anything spectacular. Either they kind of disliked it, I got all sorts of pigmentation on the leaves, either they just didn't respond. So that's a side note. I don't know if I'm gonna make a separate video with the silicone because I don't know if it's doing anything. And to be honest, I would like to retest it because maybe the orchids that got pigmentation and spotting on the leaves, maybe it was just a fluke, maybe it wasn't the silicone. So it's one of those instances where I think I might draw the wrong conclusion and I just want to redo the experiment anyway. That's why I'm postponing the silicone situation. I'm personally not entirely happy with it, but it might just be a coincidence. Alrighty, let's get back to business. So, as with any repotting, we'll squeeze on the pot and pull up. And here we have the orchid. I will remove all of this medium, but it's mainly moss, so it's gonna be pretty easy, just a little bit time consuming. So I'm dealing with a lot of fine roots here and my fingers are just not tiny enough. So I'm gonna go in with my trusty tweezers just to make sure that I don't damage too many roots. Some roots will get a little damaged. It's something that happens whenever you repot. The idea is not to damage too many of them, as many as to actually set back the orchid. But I don't think we're in danger of doing that. Okay, so approximately 7 minutes later, I'm done. Sphagnum moss is actually pretty easy to remove because it doesn't really attach to the root system, but if you have an orchid with a big root system, it kind of takes a while because you want to be careful. You don't want to break too many roots. I also found some dead roots here in the back, so I removed those. The top layer of bark was easy to remove as well because it was small grade bark, it wasn't big grade, and that always gets removed very, very fast. And here we are, this is my orchid. It is now time to prepare our pot and our new medium. P.S. No rinsing of the roots or hydrogen peroxide because this is an older orchid. I've already done that. I know the medium was fine, didn't have mushrooms, didn't have snails or anything weird. Alrighty, so the first layer that I always put in my pots is sphagnum moss. For those of you who are new, I'll explain it really fast. If I ever have excess water in my decorative containers, sphagnum moss will make sure to absorb it. It's not gonna stay there and wait to evaporate and degrade my bark. No, as the medium dries, the sphagnum moss will absorb it because it is very absorbent. It will deliver it to the entire pot because my mixture is interconnected. Yes, I will use bark and moss as well, but this layer of moss will communicate with the upper layers of moss and it will transfer pretty much the moisture. I always leave a little bit of water when I water on the bottom because I live in a very warm climate. If you live in a cooler climate, you might not want to do that. It might not work out so great. I'm just working with my environment and doing the best of it. Also, if I ever so desire to transform this into a self-watering pot, yes, we can make self-watering even with a combination of moss and bark. As long as we have moss, it can work as self-watering. Being that I will have a first layer of moss, will make sure that whatever the wick delivers from the reservoir will be absorbed by this first layer of moss, which will communicate with the next layers of moss and so on and so forth. This will not mean that I will go self-watering, but I want to keep my options open. Also, another bonus of using a bottom layer of moss, if I ever so desire to hang this particular pot, then the bottom layer of the pot will not be extremely dry, which is something that happened to me in the past when I was hanging my pots. Do you remember at the balcony? Yeah, the bottom was so dry, the top was so dry, middle so-so, but I didn't have an even distribution of water. So only good stuff with the bottom layer of moss, but beware, not everybody will benefit from the bottom layer of moss. Being that this is a shallow pot, I can position my orchid in the pot now, actually. And you can see the roots are already touching the bottom. What I want to do is make sure that the older growth is situated as close to the rim of the pot as possible, because we will not have new growth from here. Maybe from here we will, maybe from there we will. We're not sure what the orchid will decide to do, but what we know for sure is that here we will have the rhizome continuing and creating new growth. You can see that I already have new growth starting here. So I want to position this in the center or as close to the center of the pot as possible. So now maintaining the orchid in place, this is awkward to film, I'm just gonna go ahead and add the other layers of my mix. And you might know I like to mix my media directly into the pot. And voila, my orchid is potted. You might have noticed that I did use more sphagnum moss than I typically would with a cattleya or a phalaenopsis, for example. And this is because this particular orchid is different. As I was saying, it really enjoys its water and it absolutely hates being dry. So I'm trying to accommodate for that. You saw how good the root system was in a total sphagnum moss medium with the top layer, no aeration, self-watering, so this will be absolutely fine. Also, the top layer is bark because I'm trying to minimize algae formation, which can happen a lot in very wet media. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the other orchid really fast and come back when I'm done. Okay, so I wanted to show you really fast another downside of the orchid simply not having space in the pot anymore. Most of the times it will start to grow outside of the pot, yeah, but sometimes new growth can actually get stuck. And you can see here that I have a new growth, and this was just trapped under the medium because it simply didn't have space enough to grow. So eventually it would have poked out of the medium, yeah, but what if it rotted before that, you know? So be mindful that with these types of orchids, it's really not the greatest of ideas to let them be very crowded in the pot. If they're mounted, it's a totally different story. If they are in an open basket, again, totally different story because they will have space. But in a pot, they can actually have their new growths getting stuck. Alright, so I tried to shape it a little bit, didn't work out so well. It's not all that flexible. So I'll try to play around with the light, maybe make the new growths turn around, grow towards the middle. It's always fun with bulbophyllums, but it is what it is. So here we are, both of my orchids are now potted, and I'm pretty sure I can get 2 years out of this one. With this, I don't know. I think next year I will need to upgrade the pot once again. It's okay though, I have bigger pots as well. There is also a question of space here. So we'll see what to do then. I bought myself another year though, I'm pretty sure. Maybe a year and a half, hopefully. So that's about it for today. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will be working on a new setup this week, not setup, a new grow space in the grow room this weekend because my African violets are too big. They actually grew since last week, since the weekend, in 6 days, 7 days. They grew so much they don't fit on the shelf anymore. I forgot that they're not orchids, and non-orchid plants actually grow. So I do need to set up a new shelf. I already got it. We're gonna set up some light on it as well and make it a sort of universal shelf. So I'll film it in the weekend. We're gonna see it next week. For today, I think it's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video and you'll have a great weekend. And you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you wish to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below. And with that said, I'll see you guys next week. Bye!